Welcome back. It's been a couple months since we last did one of these videos, and I'm glad to be back to talk to you about what a crazy world we live in right now. I don't think I remember the last time when we had all the major gas price indices around the world all showing incredibly high prices at the same time. It is a bit of a worry. It just shows how precarious our supply and demand balance really is. This is in September. September is traditionally not a month where we should see high prices. September is usually the shoulder month where it hasn't got cold yet in the winter in the northern hemisphere, and we should have our storage facilities quite full. In fact, we're just seeing the opposite. In Europe, we're seeing storage very low. And this is causing people to be concerned of what's going to happen in the winter months that are coming up. Now, some of us, including myself, feel that it's a little bit of a man-made crisis, so to speak. I feel the Russians are playing a very smart game. I have no basis of this. I just think my gut tells me this is what's happening. I may be wrong, but the Russians have obviously had some supply issues over the last few months. Are they real or are they created? It's hard to know. But the supply issues have resulted in less gas going into storage. And now when Nord Stream 2 does start up in the end of the year, it can be seen as a savior. Aha, look, Europe needed Nord Stream 2 all along. Thank God it's here. And Nord Stream 2 is going to save Europe from high prices. To me, it's a little bit like the situation where the person sets the fire and then wants credit to put out the fire, to find the fire and to put out the fire. So is this really a crisis created by the Russians? I think maybe there's a little bit to that. But why are we seeing prices high in the US? Well, the US, in some ways, is just weather related. We've had a lot of hurricanes. Obviously, gas is produced in the same regions, the Gulf Coast, and there's been shut-ins. But that doesn't explain why prices are high in the Permian and prices are high in the Rocky Mountains, etc. There's no hurricanes happening there. I think it's because of the general feeling towards the oil and gas industry. The financial community, the equity community, the regulatory community, everybody seems to be using the oil and gas industry as a bit of a scapegoat. It's a poor source of all our problems. If you could just get rid of them, get rid of the oil and gas production, stop drilling, everything is going to be okay. Well, unfortunately, that's not the case. So we do see, of course, some of the publicly listed companies are afraid of announcing big major investments in supply because there's certain portions of their shareholdings or the activists or certain portions of the public community that will rally against this. We've seen that companies such as Exxon, it didn't take much to actually get some interesting people on their board who are very much against the whole ethos of what the company does. I find it quite ironic that, we have a publicly listed company and people are getting on the board, so the listed company then has to do something against what it's meant to do. No one has to buy Exxon stock. If you buy Exxon stock, that means you believe in the business. So it's kind of ironic that you have the shareholders, some shareholders buy the stock so they can change the company. It's like, well, if you don't like what the company is doing, don't buy the stock. But here we are where activists and certain people are very, very short-sighted in my view. We don't have a lot of alternatives right now. And by telling the big publicly listed companies that you shouldn't invest in increasing supply, and then reports such as the IEA saying the same thing, the financial community, the guys who finance these projects, who buy the shares, who provide the project financing, the debt and the equity, they get scared. And so there's a number of banks around the world that just say we don't invest in oil and gas anymore. Well, unfortunately, that's not so simple, is it? You can't just stop investing in oil and gas. This is oil and gas, especially gas, is going to be a really important fuel. And I'll try to make a point of that in this thing. So back to high prices. So we've seen European prices are high because of storage. We've seen US prices partly due to the weather, partly due to this general sentiment, difficulty in drilling, difficulty in getting permits, regulatory uncertainty, that kind of thing. But what's happening in Asia? Well, Asia is kind of feeling a fallout of that. Oftentimes, Asia has higher price. Most of the time, Asian prices are higher than Asian LNG prices are higher than European LNG prices, so it attracts cargoes to Asia. Well, now European prices are actually high or higher than Asian prices. So Asia is having a tough time attracting new cargoes. So the prices are going up in Asia. At the same time, demand is continuing in Asia. China and all these countries are doing relatively well. And supply, something I've been talking about for the last few years, we are just running out of new supply options. We are seeing increasing number of countries in Asia with declining domestic production. Indonesia is a great example where so many of the large fields that were being produced by the international majors, international energy companies, are now, those companies are leaving because of many reasons, including what I talked about, the shareholders, and the local domestic companies are just not investing in keeping that supply up. And they were not capable of it or not wanting to, etc., but we're just not seeing that. In Australia, we're just not seeing a lot of wells being drilled. People are not exploring for gas, but exploring for oil. So without this new constant sources of supply, we shouldn't be surprised when demand keeps on going up and there's no new supply, we're going to see higher prices. I fear we're going into an extended period of longer gas prices and energy prices because we're not bringing in new energy supply. There's no shortage of people still proposing to build LNG import facilities all over the world. There is a shortage of people building LNG export facilities. And those two things to match. The only people who are still out there aggressively building export facilities are the Qataris and the Russians. And do we really want to be in a world where where the Qataris and the Russians are going to be supplying so much of the future gas that we need? And I'm going to focus on gas. I know I talk about energy, but really gas is what I know and gas is what I talk about. So what is the implication of all of this? This high prices, in the worst case, it could actually result in demand destruction. What does that mean? That means that prices of natural gas are so high that people go to alternative fuels. There are not many other alternatives. The alternatives right now that are available to most countries of the world is back to dirty oil or really bad dirty coal. And that's why we're actually seeing coal prices at record levels. So the high gas prices are actually pushing some of the buyers who cannot afford this high gas price back to dirty coal. So it's kind of a perverse reaction to the environmental movement where they have made it difficult to invest in gas, and as a result the market has decided that they should actually burn more coal, which is exactly what you don't want. You don't want, as a result of the strive for a cleaner environment, to end up burning more coal, which is exactly what's happening. I understand even in Europe now we're seeing some of the coal-fired power stations coming back. And this is not the first time we have seen this happen. So I think we really need to sit back and think about what is going on in the world. We have this incredible hype right now of, low carbon, zero carbon. It's almost like there cannot be enough people putting out announcements of this every day. And so we are chasing the limited options that we have. And you can see the number of projects that are trying to promote hydrogen, for instance. Let's talk about hydrogen a little bit. Now, hydrogen's been around a long time. We all know a lot about it. Obviously, we've seen the pictures, etc. And we know that hydrogen as the molecule has no carbon. So it sounds wonderful. You burn it, all you get is water. Great. Sounds great. There's a couple of problems with hydrogen. Number one is it doesn't exist as a resource you can just go and drill like gas does. So you have to actually make hydrogen. How do you make hydrogen? 90-something% of the world's hydrogen today is made with energy from fossil fuels. So just because you make hydrogen from fossil fuels, and those fossil fuels, when you make the hydrogen, that process emits carbon. If you can somehow get that hydrogen to a market, let's say Japan, and they burn it over there and they think how great we are that we are burning a low carbon fuel, they forget the fact that to make that low carbon fuel, you actually had to emit carbon in Australia, for instance. The big project people are talking about is actually taking coal from here, where I live, close to Melbourne, which is a dirty, dirty, high carbon, high ash coal, brown coal, and cleaning it up here and then sending the hydrogen to Australia, to Japan. Well, in the end, if we're in a global environment like I think we are, We are emitting more carbon here in Australia just so Japan has low carbon. That doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. So let's think about this. Let's go through some of the things. The biggest problem I have with hydrogen, there's two problems. Number one, it's hard to make. You either make it from fossil fuel or you make it from renewable energy. I'll come back to that renewable energy. I think they call that green hydrogen. But let's go back to the biggest problem hydrogen has, in my view, is it's difficult to transport. It's not difficult to transport, really, if you just had to build a very small network. If you are a little isolated island in Scotland, like they do there, and you have a windmill and you can make hydrogen and use that gas locally, fantastic. It's a very small, self-contained system. But hydrogen is hard to move longer distances. People say, well, we have a natural gas pipeline. We can just set network. Can't we use hydrogen? Well, I understand that, hydrogen being a smaller molecule takes a lot of modifications on the existing pipeline because it can actually leak because the molecule is so small. And I can just imagine the thousands and thousands of joints a pipe has across the country, across the world, that how many potential places there are to leak the hydrogen. But also it makes the metal brittle, which is not great. And a lot of our pipelines, our gas pipelines, are actually really old. So do we really want to put a gas in there that is actually going to make the metal even more brittle? We're going to have more problems with it. You can mix it with a regular gas, but in the end of the day, are we really benefiting that much? It remains to be seen. Well, the big hope is, of course, hydrogen. We're going to put it on ships like we do LNG and move it across from Australia to Japan and vice versa and all this other stuff. Well, I think we need some realism here. It's minus 253 degrees. It's like almost 100 degrees colder than LNG. And LNG is minus 160. It's cold enough. And it takes a lot of special metals and very expensive ships and big tanks to make LNG work. It took us a long time to do it. Hydrogen, I understand there's only one real ocean-going hydrogen ship, liquid hydrogen ship in the world, developed by the Japanese for the Australian trade. And that just came out in the last few months. And it's extremely small volume capacity. So to go from the one ship to a fleet of LNG, we have 400, 500 ships today. We have a long way to go to get from A to B. I'm not saying we shouldn't work on it, but I just think there's just some dose of realism required. It's a lot of hype right now, and it worries me that it's going to backfire on the industry, because a lot of the proponents of this are the same energy companies that were doing gas. So the big energy companies, they're big on gas. They realize that it's not so popular anymore. They need to show their net zero. They jump on the hydrogen bandwagon. Lots of announcements, lots of projects. New people are being hired. New divisions are being created in all the companies. 5 years from now, 3 years from now, when there's no real projects that happen, it's going to look bad on all of us. This is what happened with GTL. This is what happened with methanol. This is what happened with DME. Some of these other fluids, other fuels that we have talked about in the past. Our industry has a PR problem. We don't explain the benefits of what we create to the world well enough. Natural gas emits less than 50% of the carbon that coal does. The best solution right now for us is to really get rid of coal. And at least that'll help us then produce more increase more natural gas penetration, and we drop that CO2 level by 50% right away in places that use coal. That is the dramatic change we need. By going to all in, I'm not saying we shouldn't continue the research, but by going all in to things like hydrogen, when there is so many fundamental issues that need to be worked out, I'm afraid that we'll go down this path, and then when it doesn't work, we'll all go back to what we're doing today. But in the last 5 years, we actually look really bad to the world, and we have wasted 5 years of not replacing coal. We should be putting all our efforts to replacing coal. I think the IEA and others have done a lot of injustice by promoting that we shouldn't invest in gas anymore. Gas is the best source of energy to get us to where we need to be. Now, once we have more gas penetration, then we use the gas to make hydrogen maybe closer to the market. avoiding some of the hydrogen transportation issues. So then in the congested urban centers, we can burn different things. We can provide hydrogen fuel for cars, etc., that are, harder to control because these are mobile emitters. They don't stay in one place like factories do. So I think we need to be careful. Now, there's all this talk about, let's do green hydrogen, I think they call it, let's make it out of renewable power and all that. Yeah, that sounds great. But in the end of the day, if I have clean renewable power, why don't I just take that straight to the grid? It's much easier and better for me to move electricity. Let's put windmills where we need to, if that's what you want to do, and run, convert ourselves straight to electricity. But to make the windmills go into hydrogen just so you can store the energy, I think there's better ways to do that. And we destroy energy along the way. So let's think carefully about not getting too much in the hype. The hype meter has gone off the scale in the last few months. Just kind of plodding along, and boom, now it's just all about hydrogen and ammonia and all these other things, and we're not giving enough attention to natural gas, which is why we are seeing natural gas prices rise all over the world. This is dangerous. We need to obviously reduce our carbon footprint, no doubt about that. Natural gas, I think, is the best way to get us there till the technology and the understanding of hydrogen itself catches up. But in the meantime, we cannot ignore natural gas. And natural gas, like any other thing, it requires continuous investment. So in conclusion, what we are seeing now is a cycle of high prices. It may be a long cycle of high prices of natural gas because there's not another new supply. Demand is not going to go away because so much of the world just needs basic energy, basic electricity. If we don't watch ourselves, we could end up pushing more demand to coal, which is bad for everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. I look forward to your comments below, and thanks again. Again, just to remind everybody, by the way, these are my comments, not my company's comments or anything else. These are purely my own views, and I hope you take it as such. Thanks. Bye.